Hello and welcome to the DnD420 podcast. This is a show dedicated to helping you become a better dungeon master. I'm your host, Eric M. Hunter, and I am a struggling game master trying to figure out how to tell a better story. Joining me shortly is Jimmy Shields. He is the creator of DnD420 and an avid D&D fan with over 30 years of experience. In this episode, we wanted to go back and do a deeper dive into NPCs, much like we did with creating our environments. So in this episode, we talk about what makes a good NPC, what can make a bad NPC, and why you might want to use one over the other, both by having them string the players along and keeping them together on the plot, or using them as sort of a misdirection. All right, so we have done a huge deep dive into environments, creating environments, using the five senses about what's important to the characters and how those things are going to play into the world that they're playing in. And we touched a little bit about NPCs as well, and I wanted to go back and do a deep dive on NPCs too. So what... do you have like any core beliefs as to what makes a quote-unquote good NPC in terms of, okay, this is a character that is not somebody that I would play, not somebody a DM would play, but just a character that that you kind of want to have around, that you know is going to be the good cop and things. Like, is there something that...
Oh, wait, I thought you meant like a high-quality NPC, but you mean kind of like a good guy NPC?
No, sorry. No, not at all. Like, okay, when we had Nathan on last time, we talked about Melf. And that was like an NPC that... What, did I say his name wrong?
You said NBC.
NPC. NPC.
NPC, yeah, that's all right.
That was memorable. Like, in that game, we came across so many NPCs. Like, there were...
Yeah, and you just said it, man. You just said it. Memorable. What do the players like, and what's memorable to them? That's what makes a good NPC. All the other shit that I come up with that I think is cool is just stuff that I think is cool. All right, but what makes a good NPC is one that the players want to interact with, that they want to... listen to, or whatever the case may be, whatever you're, some, like as you said before, the NPC kind of can act as a messenger, but they're more than that. There's so much more than that, and I don't like to think of the NPCs as messengers per se. They can also be disinformation artists, just depending on how you plan on using them, what type of kind of alignment the NPC might have. What kind of traits that NPC might have. That has more to do with it, to me, than what I need at the time out of the NPC. And then that other stuff comes later, how like a delivery service. You had mentioned in one of the earlier episodes, a computer can be a good delivery service, or an NPC could be that delivery service if they don't have a hacker. So it is kind of, to quote a wise man, a get out of jail free card.
Oh.
But what makes a good NPC is if they're memorable or not. That's long story short, in my opinion.
So obviously we want to tie into things that relate back to the characters. So, and again, this goes back to kind of like the environments and stuff where we were talking about like, well, what's a good way to kind of slow the players down? And the way you do that is by tying back into their backgrounds and their storylines that they've created for themselves, and then kind of hinting at those things to see if it builds a conversation. We've also talked about railroading, which again is something that I am guilty of big time back in the day, of railroading our players to go a very certain direction. So, and I've noticed in some of your games too. Well, let me preface it this way. So, when is a good time to have an NPC that is not a good NPC, like in terms of morality.
Oh,
Um,
this time we are talking about alignment and such, are we?
yes. So, and the reason I bring this up is because there's been a time or two in the games that we've played where we have met an NPC, the party has met an NPC, and we're like, oh, we're looking for information, we're gathering information. And the NPC is very boisterous and kind of boasts up, and it's like, oh, well, blah, 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 you want to go down here, you want to turn right. And you kind of give us, as a DM, you give us like a look that isn't legit. Do you know what I mean? Like,
Yeah, I mean that's when we're in person, I want to role play, and I can't help but to role play how that character's facial expressions might be, and I get a little devious sometimes, and sometimes I get devious with what I'm saying, and my face matches, and sometimes I'm being completely honest, and I give that devious look. It's kind of like poker that way, but yeah, I know what you're talking about because I don't want to have to roll for skill checks every single time. Like, oh, uh, I just want you guys to know that he seems fake. There's something about this guy that's illegitimate, and without having to say there's something about this guy that seems illegitimate.
right.
You know, of course, I can do it straight faced as well and see if you guys come up with a sense motive, please. Um,
Right. Well, yeah, that was the time because it was like, oh man, this guy doesn't seem legit. Like, I kind of want to do sense motive, and you were like, do you want to roll sense motive? We're like, yeah, we're gonna roll sense motive.
yeah, that's a way that instead of me saying, okay, guys, he just told you to go down to the corner and make a left, give me a sense motive. I don't want to have to do that, obviously. Um, but I could have done it that way. Or I could have waited to see if you guys had asked for a sense motive. Um, but that's kind of a little different thing. That's more skill usage, and I feel like we can get into skill usage in a later episode because I can go on for episodes,
Many.
days, months, yeah, about using skills and how to use them. Um, Not necessarily effectively, but creatively. So we'll talk about that in the future. That's a little touch on it right there. But back to the memorable NPCs and the ill motive NPC. Um, Sometimes NPCs are a challenge, not necessarily a fight, but a social encounter. So when you come across an NPC that you have planned that you think is a cool NPC, I mean, he may be a speed bump in the road for us. He may be a set of social encounter or set of social skill checks. He may be a misinformation artist. He may not know he's spreading false information. It's possible to tell you guys the wrong stuff and be telling the truth just through ignorance. We all
Oh,
like
okay. Just
you.
that is just his knowledge of the.
Yeah, I saw the guy go down this way and turn left. However, what he doesn't know is that was an illusion.
Oh,
So
okay. I gotcha.
that's a ridiculous version of it, but just because somebody tells you something that they know doesn't mean what they know is correct. So there's also those things. Those are all things to consider when you're dealing with information from an NPC. What do you want as a storyteller or as a DM? What are you trying to convey? What are you trying to do here? Is it an encounter? Is it a social encounter? Is it a social encounter that could turn into a combat encounter? Is it a social encounter that could turn into a cohort? Is it going to be a recurring NPC? What type of information? Because it's really easy to say, well, we go to the bartender and ask him because he sees a lot of faces. We all think that way, and I bet in at least one of every storyteller's game in their life, the characters have wandered into a bar and said, "Hey, barkeep, did you see a guy that met this description come this way?" Well, he has a certain type of information, so that's important to consider from your NPC's viewpoint. The bartender only has so much information, and what the people there are telling him may not be the truth or just what they've heard. Names could be wrong. Somebody who knows that people might be looking for them or knows that they're up to no good may be using aliases. So if you go in and say, we're looking for Dirk Diggler, I've never heard of anybody by that name, because Dirk might be going by a different name. Just things to consider. What type of information do they have, and how accurate is it?
So I guess again, it kind of sounds like a lot of that information is really coming from the players, where like you may have created this really cool NPC, and the players could care less about it, but the information's still important. So maybe the information gets shifted to another NPC that for whatever reason they seem to like more, and then you just kind of build off of them.
It could. Um, I like to think of it as part of the puzzle. Now, when we hear puzzle in D&D, we often think, oh, I got to match up letters, or it's a crypto quip, or I've got to decipher something, or move this before I move that, or twist this direction before I twist that. But that's not necessarily always the case. My favorite types of puzzles are the lies you hear and sifting through them. Because a lot of people will tell you lies if it suits them. And in my game especially, and I know that you've been privy to this, you will hear lots of lies. And if you hear enough lies, you should be able to discern which ones are wrong and why. You can mix in a little bit of the truths that you get with it and start to figure it out, mostly through skill checks or other information that you've witnessed yourself. But then you can start to see who's lying and why and where that takes you. And that can fuel an entire campaign with just a few little things. And I often hear, I'm going to kind of skip ahead to like overarching story where we work on that in the future, but I hear of a lot of people saying, I want my world to take place with, it's got 7 continents on it. And all but one of those continents are inhabited by great kingdoms. And there's going to be this type of king and there's that type of king. And I like to say, well, who's my next door neighbor? I don't know if I care about the guy on the other side of the world. Maybe I've heard of them and that's fine. Write that stuff down and let me glance over it later, because that might be all the information I actually have about that. But what's more important to me is, what does the guy next door look like? What does, what do I hear on a daily basis? Do I hear about the guy or halfway around all the people all the way around the world on a daily basis? Is that really what I'm hearing? We can start small with a lie. One lie. The princess has been kidnapped. It's kind of a cheesy one, but let's go with that old trope. The princess has been kidnapped. That could be a lie. Somebody may be hiring you for another reason altogether to get you investigating into the princess's disappearance, but really she's just gone away on vacation somewhere. And so you asking about the princess gets a lot of attention by town guards. Of course it would. You're asking about the princess's disappearance all of a sudden.
Right.
And we've just created a story, man. Now these other guys, you can create whatever motivation they had for getting you to follow this lie. And you've got an entire storyline planned out, because those players are going to want to get to the bottom of what's happening. And you could go for sessions before you ever hit the first part of an adventure, just by telling a lie. So let's start small there, and don't give the players too many things. And I know I'm guilty of that with you guys, but you guys are all so smart and you figure out the simple shit easily. But overall, in the grand scheme of things, start very simple with your storylines, and then have the NPCs related to those simple storylines, and you convolute it and make it complex with how those NPCs relate to the storyline.
Yeah, there's definitely been times, now that you mentioned it, like I'll think back where I feel like maybe it's actually just been groups of people that either they're of one alignment or another, or maybe of one religious ideology or another, and it's like, oh, all these people are crazy. Like, all they say is crazy stuff. Like, none of this information we can really use. But there's been a couple of times where it's like that piece of information became true, and it may be, I mean, no fault of our own, because we basically railroaded this entire religion as just being nuts, and like just moved on with our time, and we ended up maybe going down the wrong path because of it.
Yeah, and it's, again, it leads back to that type of information. What information did they have? What made you think they were crazy? Like, because they had something, but then you find out later on the value in what they were doing, and they were just, you know, um, a little twisted, a little convoluted by it. They were a little excessive in their ways. They were devout to a cause. Um, and then, you throw alignments and tendencies in there, and of course, religion is born. But beyond all that, there are motives in certain NPCs. So if you go into like a religious cult, somebody had a motive somewhere along the line, and it's important as a storyteller when you create that religious cult. What is that motive? What motive started all of this? And then you want to hide it in the back of your head. And then you can kind of create that religious sect around whatever they teach. And they're never going to tell their followers, hey, I basically want you here doing this because it makes me rich, or because of whatever. Maybe they actually believe everything that they say, but a lot of times in cults like that, there's a fair bit of falsehood going on, or what the good guys might consider falsehoods.
Right. Yeah. I mean, would there ever be a good time, rather than just, I'm trying to think of the right way to say this. Would there ever be a good time where you want an NPC to give false information? Like,
oh yeah, absolutely. When we're just talking about religious cults here, that's a great time. Especially if this religious cult is doing. Let's create one right now. Let's talk about it. Well, let's say there's a religious cult that is mining away at this seemingly useless material to you. It can't be worked into metal. It doesn't have any kind of magical powers. It's not especially pretty to look at. There's no way to harness anything from it. Let's say that that's the case, and they're doing so because they believe it's holy. And so they'll tell you this complete falsehood that is true in their eyes. Well, we mine this material in order to offer it up to our gods. And now you've just given, a direction. Oh, you offer this up. Okay, that's what you're doing here. You're doing this as an offering. Okay, well, how do you offer it up? Oh, what we do is we take and we set it on this shrine in the middle of the night, and then we go away, and then this terrible monster comes, and it eats it. It eats this stuff up. But we dare not be there because we don't want to be there when this terrible monster comes, because it could kill us. It's a fearful monster. And, well, what makes you afraid of it? It begs certain questions, right? So then, oh, well, people have been killed by this monster. We found bodies completely mangled. So it gives you something to follow. Well, we're going to go there in the middle of the night. So you've just told this lie, and I know you don't know that it's a lie right now, but you just told this lie so that the characters would be there to see this terrible monster come. Maybe we'll defeat it, right?
right?
Go there,
Yeah.
the monster never comes, but a thin man in a robe comes after everyone's left, and he gathers all the ore up and takes it back to some other place where he is smelting it. He infuses it into something, and he's a crazy alchemist, and he's figured out a way to do something magical with it. And it gives you this really cool insight into the inner workings of this cult. If you follow him and question him, chances are he's going to be fairly well defended by probably cultists, and you'll have a series of encounters that lead up to this whole thing. But you've told a falsehood, and it was true to the person telling it when you used your what's the word for it? Hold on a second.
Just kind of like, I mean, you're spinning a tale, but you're not.
It's a falsehood, yeah.
Yeah, it's a.
It's sense motive. That's the word I was looking for. A person could tell you this tale. You sense motive, and it's honest. That doesn't make it the truth.
Right. Yeah. So those are the times, like, yeah, he's telling the truth as he knows it. Like, it's one of those.
Correct.
Okay.
And now you've been led to the actual truth, where you can convert cultists or get them to turn away or say, well, this isn't true. Why? Maybe they're beneficiaries of the magic that's being worked in this cave somewhere. whatever the case may be. Let your imagination run wild with that stuff. But that's a time when you might want to spread false information to progress the story. And there's all kinds of times like that. Like I said, with the princess kidnapping, you might tell a falsehood to lead the characters to the story. Maybe that one could have been detected through a sense motive role. And there's, I mean, I could come up with innumerable times when I've done this to you, specifically you, let alone
Right.
the other players in the group. When you want to lead someone somewhere, when that information begs more questions, because it either A, doesn't make sense from my perspective or my belief system, but you're begging to be followed, like for it to be followed up. Don't just tell a lie that nobody cares about. Otherwise, no one will ever know it was a lie, and in the whole grand scheme of things, they may believe it as the truth for as long as they live. I could tell you that this lie, and it's a mundane lie. We're just gathering up this ore because we use it to create these baubles that we wear. Well, that's not very interesting.
Right, yeah.
Okay, I believe you.
Yeah, there'd be no reason for the party to question that because
they're wearing it.
Right, it doesn't seem out of the ordinary.
And the lie could be something altogether different, and it'll never get uncovered if all this alchemy stuff is going on in a cave if you don't make it interesting. So I think you can tell a lie to lead someone somewhere as long as it begs more questions and the breadcrumbs are enticing enough to pick up and follow.
So I guess that's a part of it too, because I feel like if you told a lie as an NPC, hoping that the players catch on that it's a lie to do some sort of sense motive or to go against whatever the player was saying, like, it seems super counterproductive. Like, it sounds like if the NPC himself or herself doesn't believe in the lie as factual, then it's kind of pointless to even say the lie in the first place. Does that make sense?
No, that I can see where you're coming from. However, being caught in a lie makes this person more interesting.
Oh, that's true. Yeah.
What else are they lying about, and why did they lie? Now you can make that lie, the why did they lie, the interesting thing. If you mean for them to be caught, if it's an outrageous lie, the party sense motive, and they know he's lying, and they poke and prod some more. This whole thing needs to be interesting then, especially on the why is he lying aspect.
Right, yeah, because then that opens the doors to things that's kind of the literary sense of show don't tell.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So and this all goes back to the one thing where I kind of got sidetracked because it's DnD420 making the NPCs interesting. A lie is interesting, especially if we know it's a lie or if we don't believe it but it seems to be the truth. That's very interesting. And that's one way you can make an NPC interesting. I mean, there's so many ways to make interesting NPCs, and a little bit of the work that we did, not to go too far back onto track, which is off track
At this point.
but to go back to the how we make NPC interesting. We did a lot of work when we wrote down a bunch of names, what race that people are, some characteristics and traits about these people, and some job titles. So we have a name, a race, whether they're male or female, a couple things, that we start to put together. And the reason we did that is because we even want the generic guy standing on the corner who happens to be flapping out his rug to have life in our world. We don't necessarily want his name to be Gus, and he's just simply flapping out a rug. And
Right.
if he stops to talk to, all he knows to say is, "I'm flapping out my rug."
Right, exactly.
What is this, a fucking video game? No,
Yep.
This is D&D. This is a real living, breathing world. If you stop and, hey, did you see anybody come through here? Well, that guy's name is Stodham, and he's especially fidgety, and you can pick up on that right away. And you can when asked about what he does for a living, he tells you that he's a barber, that he not only cuts hairs but he performs minor surgeries, and shaves men, and gives tonics to women, and sells perfume, and has a cure for the common cold or whatever. Now, Stodham just became an interesting guy. Whether he has anything to do with the story at all, we won't even know. So long as he's interesting, now maybe it's time. Now it's Stodham's time to tell a lie, and you know, you don't even know who the NPC. If you want to have a lie told, you may not even know who's going to tell it until it happens. With my method anyway, which is the fun part of, I think, DMing in my eyes, is that I'm figuring this stuff out as I go sometimes as well, because we've gone quote unquote off track.
Sure.
Well, you're never off track in my game. Go wherever the hell you want. You're never off track. There'll be information somewhere to be had. Sometimes it can seem a little, I don't know, planned or whatever. Because, how do we find that out all the way out here? So long as you can tie it back in a believable way, you're okay. If it gets to the point where you can't tie it back in a believable way, you may just want to change the story. Change the direction they're heading. And that's why I think I said in one of the earlier sessions, it's kind of important not to plan too far ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I can just that from you saying that, like I remember now, I can remember back on certain instances where it's like we split up, like we make it to a town and we're like, all right, let's just split up and like just try to find out if we can further our game, blah blah blah. And then like one person or one character comes across an NPC and it literally becomes like, hey, this guy's got interesting shit to say. We don't know if it's real or not, but come on, hang out. And then suddenly it's this, it's this hour-long conversation with this NPC that, from a player standpoint, it all feels like it's planned. You know what I mean? Like it always feels like all of this has been planned from the get-go. But there's so much like behind the curtain where it's like, oh no, let's fudge this and let's put this with this now. And now I was going to do this later, but now I have to do it now because this guy does this now. And this guy said this and blah, blah, blah. Like it's so mind boggling. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I mean, it's what you've got to do when the characters when the players don't make the decisions you want them to make, and the characters don't do the thing you wanted them to do. So you just got to either, adapt or abandon ship. And I've done both many times. I adapt quite a bit and spread the story, but a lot of the places you go are highly populated, and when you get a really high roll on a gather information, you're going to find that needle in the haystack. We all know Tommy.
oh,
Tommy,
Jesus.
If you're listening out there, the guy always has 12
Plus
points
12,
in
yeah.
Yeah.
Every time.
Every time, man. So when you get a 24 on your gather information, that's
godlike. I mean, it's
not quite godlike, but it's
close.
You're a private investigator of some repute.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not even rolling high. We've all heard the player shout out when you go, give me a gather information, everybody who's asking around town. It's, I got a 12, 16, 31.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that is godlike.
That's the guy who gathers information.
Yeah.
It's the rest of us just put our skill points in something else. Like, no, he's got it. He's fine. Like,
yeah. And that's something else as a DM we can talk at some point when that's another discussion as well.
Yeah.
How to help your players make a group if they don't know how. But we're lucky we've got players that know how to make a good party and know what it takes to make a good party.
Yeah, I feel like, and again, this is just me speaking from the games that I've played in, but like I don't think I've ever played in a game, not like within this guild, where I've been like, oh, we're lacking something, or somebody's not pulling their weight. Like I've never really felt that.
Well, thank you.
You're
I'll take that
welcome.
as a as a
It's a
little bit of
compliment.
a little bit of a compliment there.
But I mean, like I've
I would
played
be
in
doing a
games.
bad job. I would be doing a bad job, I feel like, if that happened.
But like I've definitely played in games before, not your games, but other games where it's like either like there's one player who knows the rules too well or knows how to manipulate the rules beyond the fact of like playing. So a perfect example of the DM sets up a position where it's like, all right, well, you guys can go one of two ways. If you go through route A, there's a possibility you might have to roll for fortitude or roll for will or something like that, or some sort of skill check. Or if you go for B, then nothing really happens and nobody, it's just kind of like the boring way. It's the way that nobody wants to go because we're playing D&D. So everybody wants to go route A except for that one player who thinks, okay, there's no way I'm going to pass a skill check, so I'm just not going to do it. And it's like,
yeah,
man, like, come on, like, just play with the group. You know what I mean? So,
well, you just said another mouthful. We're going to get into it another time when players aren't quote unquote pulling their weight or aren't fun to play with, things that you can do. And that's one of those instances, unfortunately. Sometimes it doesn't have anything to do with how the character was built or how the game was put together for those characters. Sometimes it simply has to do with the player themselves not understanding the game or having that self-defeatist attitude. And there's so many things. Again, we could spend episode after episode, but we're going to boil that down in just a couple of episodes from now. So back to NPCs then.
yeah. So,
Oh, come on, smoke another one, buddy.
Jesus, let's close it out with what is one of your favorite NPCs that you have created and one that you have played against that you have not created?
Ooh.
And why?
Gosh, ones that I've created. Are we talking about like NPCs, not like bad guys?
It could be bad guys.
Oh gosh,
bad guys
that's
are fine.
big. We'll say big bad guys. Like, can we do 3 of them then?
Jesus, Jim, just yes, we could do 3.
Okay, we're gonna do.
He's gonna do
NPC.
3. He's gonna do 3.
We're gonna do NPC, not necessarily big bad guy. Okay.
Okay.
So one of my favorite NPCs I've made was an Amastopia campaign, and gosh, man, I don't know if I remember who all was in this, but I believe his name was Gav.
Okay.
And Gav was a half ogre, and he was tall, and he was handsome for a half ogre. He wasn't what humans might call handsome, but any ogres would think that he was very handsome. He was very charismatic, which kind of goes against the ogre thing. Again, not that he's beautiful or anything, but that he's very charismatic and handsome in his own way. And he was well muscled. He didn't have the kind of unsightly proportions of a true ogre. He got that from his human side. What I don't know if I ever revealed to the party. What it turned out was that he was actually from royal stock in the great country of Einok, which is in Amastopia. The great kingdom of Einok, I'm sorry. And he was directly related to the Sorcerer King. So he had that sorcerer's blood, that royal blood. And that was the human side of him. But he was a lot of fun because I did use him in a very traditional way, like that you kind of have been considering, like an information guy or somebody that can help the party. And he went with the party a couple of times as a, I think they call it a DMPC.
Okay.
Dungeon Master's player character. Did I say that right?
Man, who knows?
I don't know what
There's
the
a lot
kids
of
are
letters.
saying these days. But he was a lot of fun to play because he was extremely memorable. He was highly skilled in certain areas, kind of like the wolf in the party, where he could take care of, not wolf like the traditional sense of an animal, but from Pulp Fiction, the wolf.
Right, yeah.
Where he could just get shit done.
Shit,
And
bro, that's all you had to say.
So he was super fun to play because he was memorable. He had interesting scars, tattoos that all had stories behind them. Without getting too much more into Gav, he helped the party in many ways. And I know that Tommy, for one, will remember this guy because he's the only person I remember actually being there in that game. Because I know that he was there because he's been in my game, my main game, every single time, just about. It's 1997.
There you go.
But anyway, so that's one of my favorite NPCs that I've gotten a chance to play. Um, and as far as NPCs, what else did you ask for?
NPCs that you played against, so maybe not ones that you created, but ones that you've played in within a campaign.
Nathan's game. He's had a couple that I thought were simply amazing, and a couple I loved to hate. But I will say that my favorite NPC of his, and I've got to choose him because he's got just such a great cast of NPCs. But I'm gonna pick Jiminy Fiddlesticks. We go into a pub in one of his games, and this guy's got rings all, and he's I believe he's a halfling. He's a halfling, and he's kind of a chubby halfling, and he's jovial. And he's got the rosy. I picture him with the rosy cheeks and red hair, and maybe even a little freckles. Kind of a young-looking appearance, in spite of his age. And I don't know if that's all true or not, if I'm describing him properly, but he was really memorable because he was so charismatic. I love charisma characters. That might just I think. Anyway,
Oh yeah.
he was so charismatic, but we knew he was a rogue. We friggin' knew it. We knew he was kind of up to no good, but he would clap his hands, and when those rings would bang together, you'd hear it. And so he would just Nathan has this habit of rubbing his hands together when he gets excited.
Yeah.
And I pictured that character doing that and hearing the rings clanking together. And he was the bar owner, and they had a suggestion on those rings. So when they would make a noise, it would cast the spell suggestion, and whatever he said would be as if it were cast from him as a suggestion spell. And that was awesome because he was always clapping his hands together and rubbing them together, wringing his hands and saying, "Why don't you buy everyone another round?"
Yeah. Yeah.
That was so cool, man. And then wasn't there to come with us or anything, but it was such a cool NPC. Even though he kind of had a very common trope to him,
Sure.
or common, we've seen this guy before, the way that it was done was clever and memorable, and the way that Nathan got so into the character, I believe that he actually played that as a PC prior, in someone else's game. And maybe that's why I loved him so much, so good. Beside the point, there was a lot in that character, and it really showed.
Yeah.
And I was gonna do something else. Oh, my favorite big bad guy, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry, man. I'll make it quick and get out of your hair. My favorite big bad guy, I made this dude named Drek Maleficus. He even sounds like a big bad guy, right?
Yeah, he does. He's got that big bad guy name to him.
He was an illusionist. And he was an illusionist that where illusion came naturally to him. His whole life he had lied to everyone. He lied about anything and everything all of his life. And I wanted to take a pathological liar and give him a bit of charisma. Imagine that. But more so, his lies were incredibly intelligent, incredibly well thought out, incredibly well preserved over time. Both, as a story and the way I had to portray him in game, crafting these lies. So again, he was an illusionist, and he was a very, very highly skilled illusionist. But his true interest, he actually had high skill points in knowledge, humanoid anatomy. He was very interested in necromancy. He was very interested in, which was a forbidden school for him because of his illusion stuff. Also ties into the story why he wanted that, because he could understand other magics, but he could never quite wrap his head around the one thing he was so interested in, and that was life after death. And he wanted to know about the soul. He wanted to know about all these things. So to me, that made him really interesting. And he was a recurring villain that happened in my game over the course of a few books. And he gained the interest of a lot of people, not just the player character group. But in the story, a guy like that um, starts to get powerful. People notice, and especially him, because he wanted people to believe that he had his fingers in necromancy. He started off as almost a carnival act, where he had these macabre shows that he did on a carnival circuit. Eventually, he took that carnival over and transformed it into a twisted, fucked up carnival that people who enjoyed it were probably sociopaths. But it was so amazing that it was the type of thing you couldn't look away. There were so many interesting acts, and I could probably, again, go on and on about this. But in order to preserve time, just know that it was macabre and interesting, and he showed all of these things that weren't necessarily true about anatomy, but he thought that he knew. And he knew because of taking bodies apart, and he thought he knew what these things did or what they were for. Like he believed the lungs housed the soul, and that's what they were for, and that you were feeding the soul by breathing. And so he preached that, and it was this interesting thing that I felt it was cool that I come up with. And when I portrayed that to the party, they thought, "What a fucking lunatic!" And I thought, "Good, you're metagaming a little bit, but that's what I wanted. I wanted to give a specific feel with that information. I wanted it to feel not right. Something's not right about this guy." And the guy could bluff you all day. He had high bluff. He had more, I think, in bluff than he did in anything else, even knowledge of arcana or knowledge of or spellcraft. I mean,
Wow.
because he was more interested in lying to you with his illusions, making you believe that he was this great necromancer. And over time, he actually was able to achieve some things by partnering up with people who were good at these things. And eventually he gained, like I said, a very powerful necromancer friend. And when he was killed, he had the ability, and he came back. Some of the gods took a special interest in him, and he's now cemented himself in my game as a power above. But he has been defeated a couple of times in the past. I let him live on for the sake of having. This is something else I like to talk about with people. Having reusing NPCs, I reuse this Drek Malefus, and he is now a deity. And whether or not you know the backstory of this deity doesn't matter, because now you take all that stuff that we know, and we can tuck it aside and say that's what fuels this deity. Now I have this really cool religion that's shaped after his beliefs. And they are really set on making you believe there's this afterlife. That not even really that do they even believe it, and there's this really tense situation there going on. It's just extremely colorful. So Drek Malefus is actually probably my all-time favorite NPC to play, even though he was a big bad guy.
Yeah, it sounds like he's got a very Magneto sense to him, where it's like he's a bad guy, but what he believes he's doing is right.
He does.
Yeah.
He really does. And that you encountered some of his cult before, if you remember, in the Serengeth game. What was the name of your character when the sky fell?
Darius?
Darius
Bear Charger?
Yeah, when you guys went to that northern town, blood seemed to ooze up out of the ground.
Yeah, I do remember that.
Be there, and then I believe it was Darius who shot the priestess in the face because it was so creepy.
Yeah.
Even though she was doing nothing wrong, Darius was like, "Fuck this bitch crazy."
Yeah.
So if you take Drek Malefus and I reskin him into this god, and that people worship, there was the feeling that you got, and you got to live through that creepiness that was created by having a real backstory.
Even though we may have not have experienced it all in that one particular game.
No, you experienced enough of it to know that it wasn't
Yeah.
holy, it was evil, all this other stuff. When Drek was very sinister and evil, at
Yeah.
heart. He didn't think he was. He thought he was doing good again. You said.
I think one of the best NPCs that I played with was, again, from A Pirate's Life, was Willem, because Willem comes off as a kind of a high elf, very skillful, good at sneaking around and hide and that kind of thing. So we were just taking advantage of him left and right, and it hurt when he wasn't part of our group. Like when we would go into battle and we didn't have Willem with it was just like, man, we are losing a vital part of this group when like we're struggling to get through these fights. And there was a lot of little things that you did throughout. I mean, this was like a 3-year game or something like that.
Went about 3.5, a little over 3.5 years.
Yeah, and like from the beginning, you were dropping these little hints about like the backstory of Willem and where he came from and that kind of thing. Like you constantly talked about his slender hands, and like anytime we made camp or were on the ship and going and taking watch for the night or something like that, Willem always went off to like a secluded location or off to his own chambers or like into a tent or something, just absent of the rest of the group, which again at the time as a player didn't think much of. They're like, oh, this is just again, to me it was just this is just a characteristic of this character, like this is just
right,
a trait.
He had a hood and he wore a mask over his mouth and nose.
Right.
He was very secretive, so going off on your own and hiding out in a tent somewhere,
not that big a deal. Like it just, he was happy enough to be running around with us. We were happy to have him, so we don't push buttons, that kind of thing. And then we have this huge firefight, and the ship that we're fighting like burns down, and like somebody tries to take over our ship. It was a big fucking battle, like huge, and Willem ends up dying in it. And it's like, what? And then we find out that Willem was a woman the entire time.
Yeah.
And then like all of this history of her just like becomes exposed. And it's like, it was so, because it changes it, not only knowing obviously what the gender of a character was changes when you thought it was one but now it's the other, but it tells such a larger story about what that character was doing the entire time, like how precise they were with every single one of their actions and how thought out they had to be and how secretive they had to be. And I think there was even a couple of times where there were chances where the party members may have found out that she was a woman and that she had other things going on, but like it goes back to what we talked about at the very beginning of this episode, which is what makes a good NPC. And at the end of the day, it kind of talks into what D&D is as a game, which is there's so much going on in the background that just having these tiny, minute little pieces of information drop just completely expands on the history and the world that you're living in. That like, what did this, I mean, because she kind of came off to us as like she was this high elf, she was kind of part of royalty, like she was specially trained, like way better than she should have been hanging out with us, because we were just a bunch of ruffians like that were picked up out of a prison, and the fact that she had such a rich history that we knew nothing of until like these little bits of information that just drop, like just weighs so much more heavily on the story that like me just reading verbatim what I wrote to you and to my players could ever do.
Right. And that's all about making them interesting. And I think it's important to hide things, but make them known yet still hidden. If you can do that, when it's time for the real reveal, the longer it's happened, the more someone, oh, I knew it! Somebody's going to say that inevitably. And that is awesome. I've been in games like that where man, I knew it. I knew something was up. And you got to stand up out of your seat. And you've got to take that pose of like, I can't fucking believe it. That was awesome. To get to that point as a DM, you can sit down and lean back and relax and feel like you've just had a job well done. And that's what I go for, because you've had that moment in my game. And so have some of the other players. It doesn't happen every game because it's quite a feat to pull off even for an experienced DM. But if you know that you can build clever, interesting concepts for NPCs, that's where it begins, in my opinion. That's where it starts. Right there. The whole story. And like you said about Willem, that whole story about her was so much more that we could have ran another whole game about Willem. There was so much there in her backstory. You could have read another book just about her. It kind of begs, like, could we read a book about how she came to be? Like, who knows? Maybe one day I will write that. I don't know, but that's the feeling I wanted to go for. I wanted to make her interesting, to make her. You guys kept her around. It kind of forced my hand to keep her around, even though I was almost ready to write her out several times. You guys forced that reveal to come at the end by being so interested in her.
We needed her.
Need was a strong word, but yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the D&D 420 podcast. For everything D&D 420 related, check out dnd420.com. If you'd like to reach out to us, you can find us there on the website and on YouTube at DnD420. Lastly, as always, if you'd like to support the show, you can do that by telling another DM about the show and by visiting us on Apple Podcasts and leaving a rating and review. Thanks for subscribing and being a part of our work here at D&D 420. We will see you next week.